you ready for an entertainment experience of a lifetime? Knockdown, drag-out, hard-hitting conversations, debates, and interviews. Well, if you said yes to any of these questions, sit back, relax, and enjoy something like no other. This is the Isolation Series podcast, presented by Wellbeingsperformance.com for all your online meeting needs, and by ImprintPilates.com Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's premier Pilates studio, also specializing in rehabilitation and athletic conditioning, and finally by greenstorage.ca Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's #1 self-storage facility. Here now is your host, Spencer Miller.
Hey guys, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of the Isolation Series with me, Spencer Miller. Very pleased once again to be joined by my co-host with the most, the casual-looking Paul Shields on this Tuesday. And Paul, it is a big week as we are 1 week away or thereabouts from the start of the NHL season. I want to start off today's podcast by asking you a very convoluted question, but do you anticipate the Seattle Kraken coming out of the gate with a, maybe not a Las Vegas Golden Knights type of opening season, because they made it to the Stanley Cup final, I believe, in their expansion year. But do you believe that the Kraken have a good enough team and good enough goalies in place to instantly make a playoff run as a 7th or 8th seed in the West?
I think they'll be hard pressed to make the playoffs. But that being said, they're not in like a powerhouse division, right? They're in their division in the Western Conference, in the Pacific Division. You've got the Ducks, the Kings, and the Sharks that just are not the teams that they once were, right? I'm also not big on the Flames this year. I don't think they're going to be very good. So you're looking at Oilers, Knights, Canucks, and the Kraken. So, I mean, it puts them in a spot where they could be contending in their division, but I think they're still going to be hard pressed to make the playoffs in the Western Conference. And it's only because we're starting to see some of the teams, the two teams that would be we'll call them wild card teams for, with our baseball hearts still intact from last week. You're looking at the Central Division in the Western Conference having, the Avalanche, the Stars, the Wild, the Blues, the Jets. Like, those are some really good teams. I think the Blackhawks are going to be significantly better this year. So there's a handful of very good teams in the Western Conference that I think is going to make it hard for Seattle. That being said, I think you touched on a really important point. They picked up quality goaltending, both in the expansion draft and in free agency, and they put a premium on a hard defending team that skates well. So I think if you have those two elements, you're always going to be competitive. So it's not impossible that they make the playoffs, but I think they're going to be in tough.
Is it wrong that instantaneously I think the Kraken's jerseys are two of the best jerseys in the NHL? Because especially the blue and navy one that they have is phenomenal in my opinion.
Yeah, they've done a really nice job with that. And I'm not sure if we've talked about it on air, but we certainly talked about it off the podcast. I am a guy that likes when teams get adventurous with jerseys, right? Like I like bold jerseys.
Hold on. Not just with jerseys, ladies and gentlemen. Paul's style, as you probably followed him at Paulie Shields on Instagram and stuff like that, you know that he likes loud stuff, whether it's jerseys or other things. So Paulie's Pump Palace got a little louder and a little more enthusiastic, I'm sure, when the Kraken released their stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like, I don't mind when jerseys are a little out there, but I thought whoever designed this Kraken jersey did a really nice job. The color combo is beautiful. It's very clean looking jersey, and it's instantly one of my favorites. I also have to say, though, the same thing about like Vegas. Those jerseys are gorgeous jerseys. So that's the last two expansion teams came in hot out of the gates with some really, really nice designs.
You mentioned the Chicago Blackhawks just a moment ago, and I agree with you a little bit here in terms of the fact that they handicapped themselves pretty much over the last 4 years, essentially, because they gave so much money initially um, to Patrick Kane, Jonathan Taves, and Corey Crawford, all rightfully so at the time. But obviously, much like
Yeah,
Detroit.
Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook. Don't forget that they got, like, all five of those guys got seriously paid as they
Yeah,
deserved at the time, but that tied them up a little for sure.
100%. Kind of like the Leafs are at right now with Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, and all of those guys. Maybe not to the same extent, obviously, as my phone rings in the background. Man, I hate when that happens
You're a
during an
busy guy.
episode. I am. Yeah, but by the way, it also instantly dates me because not a lot of people have landlines anymore, but I have a landline just for my buzzer in my building and different things like that. So I apologize sometimes that we have to talk over the call. But anyways, getting back to the Chicago Blackhawks, they did have a couple of suspect years because of all that money given out. But like you said, I'm very excited to see what this team does because they got their captain back in Jonathan Taves after Jonathan Taves missed last year with an immune compromising illness. So hopefully he has that where it's manageable and he can get back to the player that everybody has known him to be for so long, especially heading back hopefully to the Olympics with Team Canada because he's been a big fixture in that since 2010, I believe. Not to mention that they have Vesna winner from last year and Marc Andre Fleury that came over from the Vegas Golden Knights. And it's a situation, and we talked about this at the end of the NHL season as well. It's a situation where it reminds me about when Pittsburgh let him go to the Golden Knights in the first place. Obviously, he's a few years older. I get that, but he still seems to be relatively at the top of his game. And we'll see what happens this year. But if I was Marc Andre Fleury, I'd be playing with yet another chip on my shoulder to show that I could still play and help the Chicago Blackhawks do something that they haven't done for the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, we've talked about him on the show before, but I'm a big fan of Marc Andre Fleury, and it's surprising that he's been moved around. There's been as much movement in his career as there has been. He's been such a good goalie for so long, and he's coming off of a season where he was the best goalie in the league. He won the Vezina. So I think you're right. I think there's going to be a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. I think he's going to be ready to prove some folks wrong or prove the Chicago team right for bringing them in, right? Bringing him in, wanting to bring him there. I think Chicago still has some hurdles to overcome. Their defense is questionable to me. I know that, Seth Jones is a very great ad there. But for me, it gets a little light after him. I think that, Patrick Kane is still Patrick Kane. DeBrincat had a great season last year, who's scoring on an unreal pace, and getting Jonathan Taves back is a big deal. But that's where I think the Blackhawks might make it a little bit, might make it tough on their division this season and push for some of those lower playoff spots.
Now, let's talk for a moment about somebody that we talked about numerous times during last NHL season, and that is Alexander Ovechkin specifically. Not necessarily the Washington Capitals, because we don't really know what to expect out of this Washington Capitals team, or at least I don't going into this year. But because Ovechkin happened to have the year that he had last year, he put himself squarely in the conversation of potentially chasing down Gretzky's record of all-time scoring if he happens to stay relatively on the same clip that he has for the majority of his career. My question to you is, in his age 36 season that he is entering next week, do you anticipate another big scoring year from Alexander Ovechkin? And subsequently, do you believe, like most pundits have been spewing, that he can break it by the time he turns 40 years old?
Well, I think for all we need to know about Alexander Ovechkin and his production is what he's shown over his entire career. A down season for Ovechkin, when people were saying maybe he's not the best goal scorer in the world anymore, was like 33 goals, which is 30 goals is really hard to score in the NHL. So if a bad year for you is 30 plus goals, I think that says everything you need to know about what Ovechkin can do. So I do expect another high goal output from him. I think that he's going to have a good season. He scored well last season. He continues to score well. And until he shows that he can't score at that clip anymore, I think this conversation is just going to heat up, because I really do think he has a chance to catch Gretzky and surpass him. What's going to be interesting is if we see a similar fall off in Ovechkin's production, like we saw with someone like Jaromir Jagr. We've talked about Jagr on the show before, and he left for many years to play in the KHL and all of that. But we saw there seemed to be a switch that went off where Jagr was still very productive when he first came back to the NHL, still scoring regularly, still being able to keep up with good lines. And then there was a point at which it just wasn't there. He wasn't getting the chances. He wasn't getting the goals and the opportunities. If we start to see Ovechkin trend that way, then maybe the conversation changes. But he's given us no reason to think that, even at what is traditionally considered older ages for NHL players, 34, 35, 36 and onward, he is putting up unreal goal totals. So until he stumbles, I think he's going to be in that conversation. It's only going to heat up from here.
Do you believe that it is possible at all to be an understated superstar? The reason why I say that in the NHL is because I think we legit are looking at an understated superstar in Sidney Crosby. Yes, he had that 3 to 4 season run where he was dealing with the injuries and potentially the career-ending injuries, and since then he's come back and been Sidney Crosby, but nobody really seems to be talking about Sidney Crosby in the way that they were talking about him early on in his career, and the Ovechkin and Crosby debate seems to well since been put to bed. Again, I'm not disputing the fact that Sidney Crosby has been a great player for a long time, especially with his leadership and all of his accomplishments, 3 Stanley Cups and different things like that. But there's still something, to me at least, that screams out understated, because not a lot of people are talking about him the way that I think he deserves to be talked about.
Yeah, I disagree a little, because the reason that people don't talk about Crosby is because he's at a point now where he's been so good for so long that you don't have to, right? And like he was one of the 3 people, already submitted for the 2022 Olympic team. In hockey, his name still comes up among the best players in the game amongst players. But we're also in a timeline now where players who are in the league, like young players, like the Connor McDavids and younger of the game, were watching Sidney Crosby before they were in the league. So we're now at a stage where the Crosbys and Ovechkins of the world are inspiring the next generation of players who are now making the NHL.
Which, right? By the way, I don't know about you, Paul, or anybody watching and or listening, but that makes me feel really old, that statement right there, because you and I remember when they came in as rookies. I still remember seeing that clip of a non-speaking English Alexander Ovechkin on a golf course hitting a hole-in-one, turning to the camera, going, "I swear to God, I swear to God." And here we are.
Or Crosby popping the water bottle on the shootout in Montreal. I think that was his first season. Like, there's just so to kind of loop back to your question, I guess we could always talk about Sidney Crosby, right? In the same way that we could always talk about Connor McDavid. We could always be talking about Austin Matthews. We could always be talking about Nathan McKinnon, Leon Draisaitl. Like, there's so many good players in the game that I think that's just the evolution of being as good as Crosby has been for so long that you almost don't need to talk about it. It's almost like, who's the best player in the game? Oh, it's McDavid. Oh, it's McKinnon. Oh, it's this. And somebody mentions Crosby and they go, oh yeah, of course, Crosby's the best. So, like it's sort of a double-edged sword. When you're that good, everybody knows it. And I think his personality plays into it, because Sidney Crosby is a very muted individual, right? He's not very boisterous. He's not very demonstrative. He's just very calm, very quiet guy who just goes about his business, right? And like, I can't think of a controversial thing he said in his whole NHL career, right? And so he's just so indicative of that soft-spoken, quality NHL captain, very stereotypical NHL captain, except he's incredible, right, as far as a player goes. So while you're probably right in saying that he's understated, I think he hasn't always been understated, and now it's goes less talked about because you just simply don't have to.
Right. I'm going to talk to you quickly right now about two teams that you and I are very keen on, and that is the Edmonton Oilers and the Toronto Maple Leafs, respectively. My question to you is, if either one of these teams does not get it done and get over the hump to not only get into the playoffs, but win around and go on a run, does Ken Holland and Kyle Dubas and or Brendan Shanahan and whoever else is at the top of the brass of the Edmonton Oilers, do they all get fired? Because there's only so long that you can have these tools of an Austin Matthews and a Mitch Marner and a Leon Draisaitl and a Connor McDavid at your disposal and not take that extra step into the playoffs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's probably a longer leash for Ken Holland in Edmonton, right? He's only been with the team for a couple seasons now, so it's not like he has years and years of playoff, failure. I believe, and I don't know that this is fact, but I believe that most teams and most management structures are going to get a pass for the bubble and for last season. Not that the results were any less disappointing, particularly for Maple Leafs fans. But I think that with how unique this season was and how challenging it was for teams, for personnel, for media members, for all of these folks that are related to the NHL, how unique the year was and how separating it can be from like certain players who didn't get to spend nearly any time with their families away. I think that there's going to be a lot of forgiveness for the season that was last year. That's just my opinion. So I think particularly with the Oilers, I think Ken Holland has got some time. He's also made some nice moves. I know he's been criticized for a couple of things, like the Duncan Keith trade didn't go over super well. They're still struggling in net as far as Edmonton goes, but he made a couple nice moves, like signing Hyman is a really nice move. That Perlini kid coming back from the Swiss League is looking really good. He's going to fight for a roster spot. So I think there's a little bit of leash there. In Toronto, it's a little different. Dubas has been around for a while. Shanahan has been around for a while. I think that if there's any level of disappointment that rivals last year, I think that it could be time for a change. If the Leafs are able to garner some success and get through, get some success in the playoffs, particularly, I think that'll give those guys a lot more leash. So I think it's two similar teams, but very different situations in their senior management.
In the words of the late, great Owen Hart, enough might be enough, and it might be time for a change. Whoa. Yes.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I don't know how, other than maybe not liking the contracts that Dubas signed for Marner, Matthews, etc. I don't know how you lay this at the feet of Dubas or even Shanahan. I think we're at a point where these players need to prove something, right? They need to prove that they're worth the money that they've been paid. So I have a hard time blaming Kyle Dubas for all this, but I know he has his haters out there. So it is going to be a very fascinating season. I think some of the Canadian teams have some of the most fascinating storylines going into this season.
Wonderful. Well, that marks the end of day one here on the Isolation Series, going through some NHL teams. Stay tuned for day two tomorrow on Wednesday, Hump Day, with myself, Paul, and James Duffy of TSN joins us to break down some more NHL stuff. You won't want to miss it. But for Paul Shields, I am Spencer Miller. This has been the Tuesday edition of the Isolation Series. As always, we appreciate you tuning in to listen and or watch us on all of our platforms. And just for old time's sake, Paul, because I haven't done it to you in a long, long time, where can people go to get some more whole grain goodness that is the Isolation Series, and subsequently me with you?
Spence, the folks have to go to podbean.com. So the isolationseries.podbean.com, where you'll find basically all of our episodes now, not just our great interviews and past interviews. You can also check us out on YouTube. So follow us on YouTube, subscribe, check us out on Podbean, find us on Instagram at the Spencer Miller, at Pauly Shields, PAWLY. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Right. Yeah, you nailed that like nobody's business. It didn't take you 9 times like it did when you were by yourself that one day trying to record it. But by the way, have you ever taken a more accurate look at what number episode we are at? Because I said that we were approaching 80, but I really have no idea, if I'm being perfectly honest.
I haven't. I know that we're for episodes that we have uploaded to Podbean, we're creeping like up on 50.
Yeah, it's like number 45 or 50 on Podbean, but I would assume that there's about 30 to 35 more that we have yet to post.
Before we linked up with our friends at Podbean. So we're getting up there, Spence. We've been bothering these people for many, many months now, and many, many episodes.
Yeah, the crazy thing is that we are fast approaching Christmas, and it was shortly after Christmas that we decided, hey, let's do this. I know that's really putting a vacuum on things for people, and some people don't want to hear that we're just about 2 months away from Christmas, but that's the fact of the matter, ladies and gentlemen, and it's crazy, but still enjoying chopping it up with you every day, unless we have technical issues, which, by the way, I don't know what happened yesterday, but IG and Facebook were down for the majority of the day as a world blackout situation or something.
Yeah, so I read actually a thread on that today. The short version is that Facebook runs all of their operations through Facebook. There was a mistake made that said none of these operations are valid, none of these servers exist, and all of the things that they would need to say that didn't happen all run through Facebook, which wasn't available. So there was quite the ordeal of them trying to get all of the Facebook properties, which includes Instagram and I believe WhatsApp as well, all were affected yesterday. So looks like everything's back up and running today. But yeah, it was an interesting day. There's a lot of bored young people yesterday staring at their phones and not really sure what to do with them when they couldn't look at Facebook and Instagram.
Mark Zuckerberg never makes it easy on himself. That guy goes through a lot of peaks and valleys. He's like a cat. He has like 9 lives.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. But always great having you on, chopping it up and talking some NHL previews. Look forward to coming on with you again tomorrow with James Duffy of TSN. But for Paul Shields, I am Spencer Miller. Like I said, this has been the Isolation Series. Thanks for going along with us on this long-winded end part of the show. And we will see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye. Hey guys, thanks once again for tuning in to today's episode of the Isolation Series with me, Spencer Miller, and that guy right over there, Paul Shields. As always, today's show has been brought to you by wellbeingsperformance.com for all your virtual meeting and virtual meet period. Please go to wellbeingsperformance.com, as well as Barbarian Steakhouse, Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's premier steakhouse facility since 1959. For more information, including any new updates on their menu, please go to barbarians.com, as well as imprintpilates.com, Toronto's premier Pilates studio, and greenstorage.ca, Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's #1 self-storage facility. For more information, please go to greenstorage.ca. And Paul, please tell people all about some more whole grain goodness that is us.
Folks, be sure to check us out on podbean.com by going to theisolationseries.podbean.com. There you'll find the audio-only versions of the podcast, including all of our past amazing interviews. One more time, that's theisolationseries.podbean.com. And hey, don't forget to follow us on Instagram. It's at @VSpencerMiller and at Pauly Shields, Pauly spelled Pawly. So find us on podbean.com, follow us on Instagram, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
And once again, everybody, thank you for watching and or listening and supporting this thing we like to call the Isolation Series. For Paul Shields, I am Spencer Miller, and we will see you again very, very soon.